Hello, I'm Tobias Nagley, editor-in-chief at Air and Space Forces magazine. We're here at the AFA Airspace Cyber Conference 2025, and I'm with Brigadier General Jeff Nelson. He's the uh, director or commander of the Air Force Accessions Center,
Yes.
which is not just Air Force, it's Air Force and Space Force.
Correct.
So you're new to the job, and it's a kind of a rough time to get this job because you come into the job at the very moment when everything is fine. Tell us about recruiting today and what challenges you see ahead of you.
Thank you, Tobias, for having me here. I appreciate the engagement and the questions. So, as you heard General Alvin say yesterday, we've met our goal for FY25, both Air Force and Space Force, a few months early. We have a large delayed entry program pool for the future, and we're very healthy for FY26, which is great news across the board. We're starting to book individuals to go to base military training into December already for this year. And as part of that, one of the things that is a challenge potentially is, hey, we're meeting goals, so we need to.
It's time to slack off.
Well, and so we have ways to track our recruiters, weekly appointments, a lot of engagements, following up on leads to make sure that they're still following up to meet their goal, because there's still a monthly goal regardless of the size of the DEP. And so that's something that we're continuing to stay focused on to make sure that we continue to make good progress for FY26.
Now, you also they've kind of expanded this role in the last couple of years, and you also have the home center. So you're responsible for ROTC and
Yes. So the Air Force Accession Center was stood up last December. It's made up of the Air Force Recruiting Service as well as the Home Center at Maxwell Air Force Base. That's Air Force ROTC, Junior ROTC, Officer Training School, and the Warrant Officer Training School as well.
So talk about officer recruiting, if you will. Are you having the same? Do you measure your a delayed entry in the same way there, and how deep is your bench?
The officers are slightly different the way we're structured. So within active duty, there's 28 recruiting squadrons across the U.S. There are 3 of them that are officer accession squadrons. So their focus is on the officer sessions that lead to OTS. So separate from ROTC, and the Air Force Academy is completely outside of my authority. They focus on both line officer and health professions as a big part of what they go out and try to recruit for the Air Force through offering different health profession scholarship programs for those that are about to go into that, and then also those after. And so they also, if you go to the Air Force Academy or ROTC and you're an electrical engineer major, a desire to kind of fill that as you go through, but then you also want to be a rated officer. So you want to be a pilot or a CISO. If you get that pilot slot, now there's potentially an electrical engineering degree slot, for the Air Force that now OTS then has to go try to fill out. So they kind of fill in, they're the shock absorber of the officer commissioning, which is what they're built to do, because they can respond a little bit quicker than the 4 years for the Air Force Academy and the couple of years for ROTC.
One of the challenges that your predecessor faced, and there was a lot of focus on at the time, was, hey, what are the messages that resonate with today's youth, and are we connecting with them? That's a moving target. What connects with people today may not be exactly what connects with people tomorrow. How are you monitoring that, and what are you doing to try to stay nimble?
So some of the examples of things we're trying to do to make sure we connect with the current generation is through digital outreach, peer-to-peer engagements, being in the spaces that they are, which are not necessarily the spaces that you and I are in, right? And so our marketing piece that is now part of Air Education and Training Command Headquarters is looking at that to make sure that they're engaging with our target audience in the forms that they're in, rather than what we have done traditionally or think of, just so that we see it in a different way. So that's been very helpful for us. We're also, based on surveys and feedback, realizing that the reason people decide to serve or want to serve varies. It may be different than what you may have think, right? They're looking for and asking questions about, long-term sorts of things, spouse employment, opportunities for education, child education, that sort of stuff, which tells us that they're looking for more of a career potential, not just a limited short-term do their enlistment and then depart. So
Now, the Air Force traditionally, and certainly the Space Force, these are they're sophisticated services. You have long-term tried to recruit for a career. That's not, the Marine Corps has a very different challenge. They're rotating people. They're re-enlisting a fraction of the force. You're trying to re-enlist. Ultimately, you're going to re-enlist the majority. How is that different? And is that so? You sort of indicated that that's a little bit of a change, but it seems to me that is kind of how it has always been.
So the retention piece falls to the
Elsewhere,
broader Air
right.
Force, but the more you retain, maybe the less you have to, recruiting piece of that. So what we're seeing is they're asking the questions or answering the questions that way when we ask. That doesn't mean that everybody intends or plans to or actually decides to make it a career, but the questions they're asking are showing that they're looking for something more than just a 4 or 6 year job and then moving on. So, but they're also looking for job experience, workplace, work experience as well, education opportunities. So a lot of different things that we can provide as both the Air Force and Space Force. And as you stated, we recruit for both the Air Force and the Space Force. The numbers are obviously significantly smaller for the Space Force based on the size of their force. So for FY25, for active duty Air Force, it was 30,100 prior service, non-prior service enlisted. For the Space Force, it was 796. So a significant difference, which means they're out there, our Space Force recruiters are out there and can be more selective. They can find the right people for the jobs based on what they're.
So that was 2025.
Correct.
So we're coming up on the very end of the fiscal year.
Yes, so
you're already recruiting into 26.
Correct.
What's your goal next year?
So today we shipped the last 435 to base military training to close out FY25. For FY26, for the active duty Air Force, it's 30,200 and 32,900 for prior service and non-prior service for the Air Force. Right.
So it's a little bit more than last year.
Correct.
About 2,000. So 8%, 7%, something like that.
Right.
Easy, doable. We'll just make it.
That's like gambling there, I would say what I could say is we are postured very well for FY26. We're sitting at a delayed entry program pool of over 18,000. So I just told you what our goal is for FY26. We have over half of that already signed up in the pool radio. We're in good shape, but like I said before, that doesn't mean that we can let off the gas because we want to continue to make sure that we have the pool for the rest of the year as well as into next year.
And build for next year.
Yes, sir.
How many recruiters do you have today?
We have about 1,200 Tier 1 recruiters out there on the line.
And you say Tier 1.
So initial assignment. So the ones that are out there going to the schools, and then we have various tiers of supervisory, the flight chiefs that are out there monitoring the recruiters in the field.
So if you have 1,200, what is your expectation for a given recruiter today?
It depends on where they're at geographically. We give them a goal. The squadron determines the goal for the individual recruiter based on how we divvy out to the 3 active duty groups that we have. Part of it is factored into what has been the number of people recruited for that particular area over the last 5 years on a rolling average, so that we're tasking people with an achievable goal. There's other parts of the country where, hey, your monthly goal is 1 or 2 just because of the geographic space that you have and how many people live there and also how often somebody actually joins the service.
So that is kind of an interesting challenge. If you have territory in Wyoming, it's a population of 500,000, it's not a small state. That's quite different than if you're recruiting in Chicago, where the population is many times that, and it's all in one metro area. How does that work?
Well, the goal for Chicago is significantly more than Montana or Wyoming because of that.
Yeah. Things that, if you were to speak to the greater community, AFA has an AFA Ames program. It's designed to try to help support the recruiting service. And together we sort of have pitched the idea with your predecessor, General Einrein, the idea that everyone is a recruiter. What's the message to everyone in out there? How can they be helpful to the recruiting mission?
I would say for those who have served or have a tie to the Air Force or Space Force, to tell your story. I know that's that kind of mantra. I spoke to the Ames panel just the other day at the AFA convention. I would say tell your story. Everybody's story is different. My story, I was a military brat, so I grew up in the military. I was born at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. My family relocated to March Air Force Base in Southern California. My parents divorced when I was there, so I didn't move around, but my mom and sister and I stayed there. So I was a dependent, military ID card, enjoyed all of that, saw my dad. But my experience as a military dependent is different than somebody who did have to move around like my kids, right? And so everybody understanding slightly the differences between. And so for me, it came when it was time to apply for colleges and consider colleges. The Air Force Academy was in the back of my mind. And so I think I wrote it down on a paper at the school counselor kept for apparently, hard copy, and somehow had a filing system to figure out who wanted to see the Air Force Academy liaison officer when they came, and they pulled my name, and I went and met with them. And, here I am 32 years after going to or starting at the Air Force Academy, working on recruiting. So I say just encourage everybody to share your story, because you never know when that's going to spark something to an inquisitive 15-year-old who's trying to figure out what they want, or a college graduate who had a path and maybe that path changed. We're ready and open for anybody.
Yeah, I think my boss, General Field, decided he was interested in the Air Force because he saw a copy of Air and Space Force. Well, it was Air Force magazine at the time. And there was a picture of an F-15 on the back cover, and he said, "Well, that's not boring." So I think one of the challenges you have is he was an Air Force brat. You're an Air Force brat. How do you reach out to the kids who have no idea? And there's a growing part of the population today who have no idea that this is actually something that they can do. How do you connect with them to say, there is a world of opportunity out there that you didn't even know existed?
I think, and I talked about it a little bit ago, but part of it is the digital environment, right? The peer-to-peer connection, going to air shows or various events, robotics competitions, the things, and also for us trying to educate the influencers in people's lives, teachers, parents, coaches, grandparents, to make sure that they understand. And we've seen that engaging with those individuals helps us as well, because it educates them on what's available. You can go to airforce.com or spaceforce.com or the Aim High app to be able to find out more about jobs. People don't realize there's over 150 jobs within the Air Force and Space Force, from aviation to engineering to cybersecurity, intelligence, space operations. There's a large list of jobs that people can do, unique to the Air Force and Space Force, and some of it translates into a civilian job potentially down the line as well.
All right, General Nelson, Air Force Accession Center.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.